Recently, I visited the Jane Austen's House Museum in Chawton, Hampshire, in the south of England, as well as the home of Jane Austen's brother Edward, Chawton House. And as you can imagine, I was extremely excited to have an entire day dedicated to Jane Austen. So I wanted to tell you all about it. Hello and good morning on a very exciting day. I am going on a road trip today. I am going to visit Jane Austen. I'm going to take you along with me. Today I am going to the Jane Austen's House Museum, which is where Jane Austen lived towards the end of her life. It's where she wrote lots and lots of her books, and I'm really excited because the 28th of January was Pride and Prejudice Day, 210 years since the publication of Pride and Prejudice, and the museum are doing a really small event in which a group of us get to see a first edition of Pride and Prejudice, one letter that Jane wrote to her sister Cassandra talking about its publication, so we get really hands-on with some really cool Austen artefacts. So I booked on to this before Christmas. It was a Christmas present and I'm so excited about it because I've always wanted to go to the museum because I love Jane Austen and I've been reading her a lot lately. I've basically exclusively been reading Jane Austen's books, so I could not be more excited right now. I can't convey to you just how excited I am. I woke up this morning so enthusiastic, like today is the day. Truly, this is a Jane Austen lover's dream today. I'm living the Jane Austen dream. To celebrate the 210th birthday of one of my favourite books in the place that Jane Austen was editing it really was quite the experience, and it's something I will never forget. So for the event itself, there was a group of 5 of us, and it was really nice to be in a room with fellow Jane lovers. It's always great to be around people who appreciate something as much as you do, because I don't know about you, but it's not every day that I'm amongst a group of Jane Austen lovers, so that was really cool. And I wanted to show you some of the Pride and Prejudice related highlights. So the big item was of course the first edition of Pride and Prejudice. We got to handle it, which was amazing, got to hold a book that Jane Austen would have held. This was a copy that was gifted by Jane to her brother Edward, and so it is his copy of the book that he bound into a really beautiful edition, and it would have been in the library of his home, Godmersham Park. Jane Austen's brother came into an inheritance, so he was actually known as Edward Knight rather than Edward Austen, and it meant that he was a much wealthier member of the family, and he is the person who gifted the house that the museum is now in to Jane Austen, her sister and her mother to live in. So there was something particularly nice in getting to see this object that not only Jane Austen had touched, but that she had gifted, and that was associated so closely with the place that I was in. Whenever I see anything like this, I'm always slightly in awe, and I never quite take it in the moment. It's only afterwards I can fully reflect on how amazing that experience has been. But I really did look at this copy of Pride and Prejudice thinking, oh my gosh, this is so incredible. And I can only explain what that feeling is like to fellow book lovers who appreciate what it is to hold a really old book that has a story of its own outside of the actual words on the page. Needless to say, I loved it and it was worth it just for that. But the other super special item in their collection is a letter that Jane wrote to her sister Cassandra talking about the very copy of Pride and Prejudice that we had held. So exactly 210 years to the day that I attended the event, Jane Austen wrote this letter, and I will read it out to you. She says, "I want to tell you that I've got my own darling child from London," the child being the copy of Pride and Prejudice. And then she goes on to talk about how a family friend, Miss Benn, was dining with them that evening, and they decided that they were going to read from Pride and Prejudice Prejudice, but not tell her who the author was. It was something of a secret. And she goes on to say that Miss Benn really does seem to admire Elizabeth. I must confess that I think her as delightful a creature as ever appeared in print, and how I shall be able to tolerate those who do not like her, at least, I do not know. Which I quite agree with. I don't know how you can dislike Lizzie Bennet. I loved getting to see Jane Austen's handwriting up close, really getting a detailed look, being able to hold the letter up to my eyeballs, that sort of view. It was incredible. I'm so excited just thinking about it now, because it's one of those things that to me is basically the coolest thing in the world, like extremely cool. It doesn't get much cooler than that. We also got to see various translations of Jane Austen's works and other editions of Pride and Prejudice, right from just after its publication to the modern day, and it's been so interesting to see how our ideas of how Pride and Prejudice should be packaged and how it should be represented have changed and evolved and adapted, and how that shapes the way that we see it today. And the other item in the collection that really stood out to me, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about, was a Danish translation of Pride and Prejudice. But I should add that it was an unofficial translation. It was made in 1904 by two sisters whose mother didn't speak any English, but they had been reading this amazing book called Pride and Prejudice that they wanted her to be able to experience. So they translated it themselves, and they put so much love and care and attention into making a beautifully embroidered edition with their incredible handwriting, and they copied illustrations from another edition and coloured them in, and I loved it because to me this is an early example of fandom, of fan culture, of people, and particularly young people, engaging with something that they love and wanting to share that with other people. So for me, that was a story that touched my heart, and I like the items that have a story around them. I loved the first edition of Pride and Prejudice, I loved Jane Austen's letter, but there was something about that really touched me. After the event, I looked around the museum some more, and I loved getting to see the jewellery that Jane Austen wore, and I got to see Jane Austen's writing desk, which I loved because I feel like I'm building up a bit of a collection of visiting authors' writing desks. So I've seen the Brontes, I've been to the Charles Dickens Museum in London and seen Charles Dickens's writing desk, and now I've added Jane Austen to that collection. And as a writer myself, of course that's an object that really stands out to me and means something, although I can't say that my messy writing desk will ever make it into any museum, and I'm not sure I'd ever want it to. I loved getting to see something associated so heavily with the act of writing itself. Just a short walk down the road is Chawton House, where Jane Austen's brother Edward lived. He primarily lived in Kent at a house called Godmersham Park, but this was a much smaller residence, although not really that small, that he sometimes stayed in, or more likely holidayed in, I suppose you would say now. And I loved Chawton House so much. As you walk in, it really feels like you're walking into a home. It doesn't feel like a sort of old museum that hasn't been touched. It really does feel so warm and welcoming. What was really special about being at Chawton House on the day that I was there was that they were displaying a first edition of Emma. So I got to see two Jane Austen first editions in the same day, which I mean, I don't know how I didn't die. This particular edition of Emma was gifted by Jane Austen to the governess of Godmersham Park called Anne Sharp, so there is her inscription inside. I loved getting to see that small hint of ownership of that book and somebody else making their mark on it. And also I must say that the library at Chawton House is so beautiful. I could have stayed in there all day. I think I might move in there because I love an old library, and it just had such a brilliant atmosphere. At Chawton House you can really move around the house, and everybody is so helpful and will tell you about the history if you want to, and point things out that you might not have noticed yourself, which I really appreciated because I think that can add so much to your experience when you visit. I loved all the panelling in the rooms and how it felt very cosy, and I also loved that I could sort of close my eyes and it felt like I could travel back in time and feel what the place would have felt like hundreds of years ago. And Chawton House is also home to the Centre for the Study of Early Women's Writing, so they have lots of other authors' possessions in their collection too. And when I went, there was a Trailblazers exhibition which explored women's travel writing. So I love getting to see things like a first edition of Mary Wollstonecraft, and I also learned a lot about some early women's travel writers that I didn't know a lot about, but definitely want to read and find out more about now. So overall, it was just such a positive experience, and I would really recommend Chawton House. I had such a brilliant time there, and I'd love to go back soon because I'd like to look around the gardens too. I didn't quite have time, but that's definitely on my to-do list. It really felt like a home and I felt really welcomed, and that sort of experience to me is invaluable. As you can imagine, I came away from the whole day thinking, oh my gosh, what is my life? I felt so lucky, so privileged to get to see so many of these items relating to one of my favourite authors. And because I've been rereading Jane Austen recently, and because I'm writing a book that is a reimagining of some of Jane Austen's works, it really enhanced sort of my knowledge of her and my appreciation and love for her, and I do think it made me get a sense for her as a person, and that's always something I really like, to feel connected despite the fact that Pride and Prejudice was written 210 years ago, despite the fact that there's a lot of distance between me and Jane Austen. I really felt like I was sort of paying her a visit. It was a really lovely day, and if you get the chance to do an event like this or to go along to either the Jane Austen House Museum or Chawton House, I would highly recommend it. I had such a brilliant day. So I hope you enjoyed this video almost as much as I enjoyed my day out. I really wanted to share it with you, so I hope it's been worth it. Thank you so much for watching this video, and happy reading!